Welcome to ReConfidence with Paps. If this is your first time, karibu sana. And if you're coming back, good to see you again. And so we are in the series Abuse, and today we just want to look at what makes you more vulnerable to abuse. Like more vulnerable than the regular person. And it's because much as many people go through different forms of abuse, you remember the different forms of abuse we've been having conversations about. There are people who probably get re-abused more. There are people who also probably get into multiple relationships that are abusive. And so we just want to look at what factors makes you and me more vulnerable in one way or the other. And so number one, you will be more vulnerable to abuse depending on your personality. And I just love this book that I was reading about the dance of anger, where it talks about how the people who are laid back and the people who are loud will still be victims of abuse in a relationship. And why? It's because the quiet person doesn't share feedback. The other person doesn't know what is in their heart, what is in their minds, what's happening to them. Like it's a space where the other person thinks they're just fine. And so that can make you more vulnerable to abuse because we are fine in here. And so it's important that someone who is going through abuse in that situation will learn to speak up. Every person can be assertive. Whether you're talkative, whether you're quiet, whether you're laid back, whether you're aggressive, everybody has a potential to be able to be assertive and to speak up on their boundaries. So when you consider your personality, it's about the aggressive person learning to communicate respectfully, and it's also the quiet person learning to be assertive and to speak up for themselves. Because when you think about the assertiveness, it's usually a middle line. You can be on this side where you're a doormat and anything goes, or you can be on this side where you're aggressive and you're such a put off. People focus on the drama instead of the issue that you're raising. And so when you think about your personality and how it makes you susceptible to abuse, it's because of how you show up. You show up as the doormat, you show up as aggressive, but you can show up as the assertive person who is able to respectfully set boundaries and just teach and encourage people to operate within your boundaries. And then number two, what makes us vulnerable to abuse is your upbringing. Just the fact that we didn't grow up in perfect spaces. And that makes me vulnerable as a victim, makes me vulnerable as also an abuser. Because, for example, if I grew up in a home where abuse was not addressed, things just happened. Probably my parents were violent towards each other. And then at school, there was also violence. The teachers were hostile and cruel. And it just became a normal part of my life. Then it means that with time, I keep on normalizing those situations, even in other relationships when I grow up. Because in my childhood memories, I feel like this was normal. And so how I grew up, how I was brought up can make me susceptible to abuse in terms of being a victim or even being an abuser. And so you just need to keep on checking yourself. What is your attitude towards abuse? How do you respect other people's boundaries? And how do you also encourage other people to respect your boundaries? And are there even boundaries in your life in terms of what you do not accept? Everybody needs to draw the line and you're like, I don't allow this in my space. And I also will not allow this from your space. That is how you set boundaries in abusive spaces. And so it can be your work situation. Probably the people you're working with grew up in places where abuse was normalized. Sometimes it can even be a colleague I'm concerned about because everybody keeps on taking advantage of them. What if they grew up in places that abuse was normalized? And so you need to just be aware and ask yourself, if this is my situation right now, what does it tell me about my situations when I was growing up? When did I become desensitized to abuse in a way I allow it so normally and so freely? And so that makes you vulnerable. And of course, if you grew up in a place where abuse was punished, it was probably spoken up against, and there was a lot of advocacy and there was a lot of also some socialization around setting boundaries and respecting boundaries and your boundaries being respected, then you grow up as a healthy person. And so just some points of self-check. And then number three, self-talk. Self-talk can actually make you more vulnerable to abuse or less vulnerable to abuse. And why? It's because everything I tell myself about myself and about others creates a precedence of how other people perceive me and how they treat me. And so if I have negative self-talk, I'm struggling with my self-worth, I have poor self-esteem, I probably have body image I'm struggling with, I have self-image issues I'm struggling with, I have poor self-awareness in a way I don't understand myself and where I come from issues, then it means that I'm vulnerable also to violation. And when you think about the self-talk, it's the fact of what I'm telling myself about other people also. it determines how I treat them. So sometimes it's possible for you to respect someone and to just keep on hallowing them even when they're abusive towards you because of what you tell yourself about them. But sometimes you just need to face the facts and just say, this is abusive. This is unacceptable. It doesn't matter how much I respect you. This is actually towing the line of respect as well, because respect is a two-way street. And so when you think about that person who is probably struggling with negative self-talk about themselves and about other people, they become more vulnerable and susceptible towards abuse. And so just ask yourself, like, in my situations, how do I talk to myself? When probably I am going through situations that are less than pleasant, probably I'm going through disrespectful relationships, I'm being taken for granted, I'm probably being abused. How do I stand up for myself? How do I show up? And also, what do I tell myself about the other people? Because as long as I don't have the right perspective of things, I keep on re-traumatizing myself. I keep on re-abusing myself, or at least creating an environment where it thrives. And then number 4, of course, when I have been exposed to abuse, like probably I was in abusive situations before, I become more vulnerable, especially to the same situations. And why? It's because there's usually a mental mapping that happens when you go through abuse. In a way, you try to avoid too much those situations, or you try to also incline too much towards trying to avoid that situation. And so that easily puts you into a place where you can be re-abused. And so, for example, I had gone through abuse in my first relationship. Probably I had a boyfriend who was slapping me and shoving me and probably kicking me. And then that relationship ends. But I never got help. I never resolved it in a healthy way. I was never able to look back and just remind myself it's not my fault. And then also just process it by having some learnings, like what can I do better in future relationships? And then I get into another relationship. It's very easy because I still have those traumas that are unresolved, and I still have that pain that probably makes me keep on living in fear. It's easier for me to get into another abusive relationship. And guess what? Also, when I go to workplaces, I'll see people who behave in aggressive ways that reminds me of my perpetrators, and I will react to them in the same way. It becomes a familiar space where I learn to minimize myself. I learn to reduce myself so that I show up in those places feeling lesser. And then what happens is that I become more vulnerable to abuse. And do you remember that abuse is not just the physical? I can actually go through physical abuse, but the problem is with time I become tolerant to the other forms of abuse. I will be more vulnerable to emotional abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, social abuse. Like I will just become more vulnerable to such situations. And then the other thing that makes me vulnerable to abuse, it's to just remind myself also that God, in his mysterious ways and in his wisdom, can allow things to happen to me that are very negative, very, very negative. I've had clients who've gone through life-breaking and just heart-wrenching situations in their relationships, but probably through resilience and obeying God, they were still able to see what God was up to in the big picture. Sometimes God can, in his wisdom, even end a relationship that was toxic because I keep on ignoring things, and then one day it blows out of perspective. And then when you move on, that is when you realize, wow, this was going to destroy me. And it was so good that I'm no longer in it anymore. And this can be even work relationships. God can just close a door after being in a very abusive situation. And then with time, you come to a place of realization and you're like, it's now making sense. So that was definitely not going to work. And then finally, the other thing that can also make you vulnerable to abuse is lack of self-awareness. Just the fact that I have not understood who I am. And so I keep on adjusting myself to other people's opinions. I keep on adjusting myself to other people's feedback without realizing what if they're the ones who are wrong? What if it's their perspective that is not objective? What if? And so taking a self-awareness journey is usually the most powerful way to be able to close those loopholes and probably just close those leakages in my soul that will make me more vulnerable to abuse. And what you do need to understand yourself, like even what is your personality, what are your gift sets, how is your heart in terms of being able to deal with the past. And of course also, who are you in terms of how you show up in the different spaces. Being able to define that puts you in a place of advantage where you stop seeing yourself as a victim. No matter what your experience has been, everybody needs to build self-awareness. And I'm always so impressed by seeing clients coming out of abusive relationship and starting a self-awareness journey. Because you build your inner muscles, you strengthen yourself so that you're able to come to a place where I am not a disadvantaged person, I'm actually someone who's coming to bring value. into every relationship I am in. And if I feel like that is not coming together, I'm willing to speak up, I'm willing to change things, I'm willing to make adjustments. Sometimes I'm very willing to move on so that you are on your own side instead of always waiting for other people to get to your side. And so those are some of the things you can be thinking about as you think about what is making me vulnerable to abuse. Just keep on thinking about those areas and then ask yourself, if today I was going to overcome abuse, and if today I'm going to see myself as not a victim anymore, but someone who is in charge of their lives and getting my ball back, what do I need to do right now? And then go ahead and do it. My name is Paps Wanyugi, and I'm your partner in creating the life you desire and deserve. See you in the next one. Subscribe, like, share. Ciao.